interesting to note that of the many titles that could have been used and were being used to describe Jesus of Nazareth, that the expert of the law addresses him first as teacher. This title is especially important because in many ways Jesus was not only a teacher, he exhibited many of the characteristics that some of us look for in an effective teacher, using examples to help illustrate a point, encouraging those you teach to think outside of the box, letting students know that it's okay to challenge long accepted answers and methods. Don't just throw them out, but to challenge them to see if they hold up. Equipping pupils so that they can use their own resources to problem solve. He taught his followers lessons in the days of his ministry on earth and inspired them to share his words and teachings with us. So many of the parables we hear that have made it through the years that we can still even apply in many ways to our own lives. The real great mark of a teacher is what you have passed on to your students, they themselves pass on to others. So as I was diving into the book of Luke this week, I picked up on some very interesting points from the scripture reading and some methods of Jesus' teaching and example, and ended up going in a direction I didn't think I would go in. It's so hard to preach on the better known parts of the Bible. My opinion, some people may think otherwise, I think it's the hardest thing to preach on is something that everybody knows from the Bible, because everyone has heard 1,000 other people preach on that subject. If you're going for something easy, if you have if you're a lay speaker, you're going for something, this is one of the things you grab out of the hat right away. It's a parable. Everyone knows, probably the best known of Jesus' parables. So sometimes you don't want to overthink it, you don't want to simplify it, you don't want to repeat what's been said so many times, but I found myself with the Spirit led in an interesting direction as I read. Jesus is in this instance showing his followers that it is okay to accept questions. Questions from critics, questions from dissenters, and even questions from the curious. It's not rare to find a spot in the Gospels where Jesus is approached by someone asking questions. Usually it's an agent of the Sanhedrin, the religious leaders of the temple. Usually it's a Pharisee. And usually they're looking to trick him into saying something that can be used against him. Either something that they think is blasphemous, so they can get him in the temple law, the religious law, or something that's going to sound threatening to Romans. That's why they bring up Caesar. It's why they want him to say something that's going to condemn him, going to get him to condemn himself. But this teacher of the law, this expert of the law, seems a little different in our passage in Luke. Yes, he is putting Jesus' ministerial authority to the test, absolutely. But instead of getting upset or attacking Jesus when Jesus has an answer, the law expert has a conversation with him. They have a discussion, which shows us that this man is actually looking for answers, and that both he and Jesus are able to participate in this discourse. You see, when someone questions you, it is possible to have something called a conversation with them, if any of you are taking notes. In ancient times, people who disagreed about something or were on different sides of an issue engaged in something called a dialogue. They would talk their problems out and go from there. Sometimes people around them would listen to the open discussion and learn from it. This talking problems out and debating law and important social issues in an orderly manner was in fact quite popular in Greece and Rome in those days. Unfortunately, they both died out in the modern era about 10 years after bell-bottom jeans. Well, we all laugh, but these concepts do not almost seem foreign to us in the wider world as we look around us. But Jesus answers the questions of the law expert, and from their discussion, others are able to learn. Think about this. In the course of the conversation we just read from Luke, the people around them get an Old Testament lesson. They get some information from Deuteronomy and some information from Leviticus and some information from Deuteronomy. They get a new lesson, what we will call a New Testament lesson in the new parable, and they get a fresh insight into thinking about who their neighbors are and what defines them as a neighbor themselves. All of that important information comes to us not from some prepared lesson Jesus had, but from a simple conversation, just because that law expert wanted to test Jesus and see if he was truly what he claimed to be. Just from that simple conversation, so much learning happens. If only you and I could react that way when put on the spot. But we don't like to be questioned, do we? When we make a decision, when we decide to do this or that, when we go a certain direction. We don't like it at work, at church, at home, within the family, among our friends. Being questioned can upset us. We can get moody, especially after we've had to make a tough decision. Someone asks us why we made a certain choice, or disagrees with how we decided to handle a situation. Or sometimes they simply don't understand our thought process. And we can get ourselves pretty hard-hearted against that person or that group of people. It can make us angry or bitter. How dare they question me? They don't know the whole story. We lash out, or we refuse to talk. Or sometimes we write off the people who disagreed altogether. Well, I'm never going to talk to him again. I'm never going to talk to him. I'm never going to darken the door of that building again after they, how dare they? We write off the people who didn't just go along with things like we wanted them to. How different would we feel? How different would things be if instead, in times like that, we asked ourselves an important question? That important question that we used to print on all the t-shirts. We used to have those rubber wristbands all over the place. We used to really like that. In the 90s, it was everywhere. In the 90s, everywhere. We really liked to use it. It's kind of fallen by the wayside. I don't know if it's because we're uncomfortable asking it anymore, or some of us felt like we were asking that question, but we're asking it to ourselves. Well, we could ask it to ourselves today. What would Jesus do in that situation? And believe me, there were plenty of times that Jesus had somebody tap him on the shoulder, questioning what he was doing. And we can see here in Luke chapter 10 that Jesus didn't get angry. He didn't write off the law expert. He didn't get unpleasant or pompous. He didn't say, well, I'm the Son of God and I don't have to answer you. He didn't say, you're not one of my followers. You're not a follower of my way. You're not one of us. You're not from our group. So it's none of your business. He offered an answer. He opened a discussion. And together the two of them were able to come to an amazing conclusion together. How much misunderstanding and division could we avoid by taking more time to follow Christ's example and have that conversation when the questions come and the disagreements pop up? And it's not just dissenters. It's not just critics. Yes, there are critics. Yes, there are dissenters. It's also, as I said very early on, the curious. Because they can annoy us too, can't they? You get someone coming up to you, and you get the guy that knows nothing. Guy doesn't even know the Christmas story. Guy knows nothing. And he's going to ask you about the Lord, and he wants the whole enchilada. I've got things to do. Are you busy? I get busy. You got things to do. I don't have time to tell this guy the whole Bible. So, well, go to church. You come to church, we'll tell you the whole thing. No, go to a church. Go talk to the pastor. I'm going to find people who say that too. Parents, I've noticed parents doing that. Well, I have a hard question, Mom. Go ask Pastor Chris. That's what I'm here for. But don't ask, but don't. Oh, go to church. They'll tell you the whole 9 yards. Oh, go to church. Or we get the person who's... Nobody fainted, yes? Okay, good. As long as it was an inanimate object. Or we get the person that's curious, but they have some doubts. They're a doubter. They're an agnostic. They were an atheist. They have doubts, and they're not sure. And they're asking us questions, and we don't like the tone. We don't want to get in that because there might be some argument. There might be some it's a tough sell. Sometimes the curious make us even more uncomfortable than the people that are angry with us. It can make us uncomfortable, make us feel like we're not the right spokesman, when we in fact could be just a person. But we're afraid, or we're too busy. If we're going to make some headway, we need to adjust our thinking. Not mocking one another, not being cynical or bitter, not being impatient, not being deaf to those around us, but allowing the Spirit to guide us in the dialogue. God allowed two different voices interacting and reacting with one another to make a very important point. He showed us that it's not title or position or proximity that makes someone a good neighbor. It's actions and care undertaken in love and compassion that are the mark of a good neighbor. Just came from one conversation, not a planned lesson, not a sermon on a mount or a sermon in a field. Just one person talking to another came. All these things that we repeat so often, this beautiful parable. What wonderful things could we discover if we were willing to listen to voices different than our own and interact with them? Voices outside of our own opinions. Voices outside of our friend group. Voices outside of our community. Voices outside of our own culture. Voices outside of our own church. Voices outside of our own nation. So often I talk to people, you're shocked, the pastor talks to people within a certain age range. And I think we had a conversation not that different than what I'm about to talk about a couple nights ago, not that long ago. How many times you've been standing with people of a certain age range, maybe the same as your own, or people a little older than you. You probably heard it from them too. And they talk about how it seems like many, many decades ago, communities were much stronger. You know what I'm getting at? You've heard that. Communities were much stronger. Everyone seemed to know their neighbors better. You knew the people who lived around you. People also talk about how well everyone knew one another and how much easier it was to talk to people. I remember one of my grandmothers once said, she goes, it was so funny, in the old days you knew and talked to everybody. You could sit and talk for an hour to people you didn't like and have a conversation. Perhaps as believers we could reach back a little and pull some of the positive, not everything, but some of the positive from the past and bring it forward. Perhaps we could reintroduce an old fad, civilized conversation with all people around you. I, for one, think it will go over a lot better than that crusading thing that we kept trying to bring back. And it'll be a lot more cost-effective, too. It's hard, because sometimes we have the tunnel vision. And that has to do with our scheduling, with our time management. It has to do with our comfort level. It has to do with extremism, which exists in the world, amen? And how that affects us. It's hard. But how much could words shared, discussion shared, just one little conversation in an afternoon, all that beautiful lesson, all those things we've heard even as children growing up. That parable was not a sit down, let's talk. It was an on the spur moment, give me an example. What good could we do in a simple conversation with others if we let the Spirit lead us? As we ask the Lord to guide us in our interactions with others and help us to see the neighbors in need around us, let us